You're listening to The Deep Dive with Cody and Skye on the Flying Monkey Podcast, TMFP Radio.
Welcome back, everybody, to The Deep Dive. You know we love to get into the really tough stuff here. And today we're going to dive into a situation that, well, honestly, sometimes just leaves you scratching your head.
It can be really frustrating.
Right. I mean, we're talking about those cases where you have a child, maybe a teenager, and they are just totally rejecting a parent. But, and here's the kicker, there's absolutely zero history of any abuse from that parent.
And those are the ones, as I'm sure you know, that can really make you feel lost. It's like you've tried all the usual explanations and nothing seems to fit. And I think our source material today really hits the nail on the head when it says, your lawyer cannot explain what's going on.
Yeah, sometimes those legal avenues just don't give you all the answers.
Yeah.
So for this deep dive, we're going to explore this phenomenon through a very specific lens. We're going to look at it from the perspective of learning theory. And our main guide for this is going to be the work of Dr. William DeBray. He offers some seriously thought-provoking insights, and we're going to try to make sense of these difficult situations in a way that, well, you might not have encountered before.
Exactly. And a core idea for you to understand right from the start is this concept of parental alienation. Now, when you hear that term, you might automatically think about, I don't know, maybe some sort of psychological manipulation or something like that. But here's the thing. In learning theory, it has a much more specific meaning. It's really all about understanding how a negative response towards a parent who was previously a positive figure in the child's life, how that response gets actively shaped and reinforced.
And just to be clear for everyone, we're calling that parent who was previously a positive figure, we're calling them the protective parent.
Yes, that's the term we'll be using. And the thing that really stands out from a learning theory perspective for you to understand is that the outward signs of affection, what we call affect, it just diminishes, it fades away when the child is with that protective parent.
It's almost like that positive connection is being actively switched off.
Exactly. And that emphasis on the observable is really, really key to this whole approach. See, unlike traditional therapy, learning theory places a huge emphasis on observable behavior. It sees that as the primary source of information for you.
So instead of trying to dig into these deep psychological reasons that might be hidden, you're saying it's more about looking at how often, how consistently those rejection behaviors happen.
You got it. It's about those patterns. It's
Yeah.
about the frequency. And really, for you to grasp the power of this, it becomes a matter of identifying those patterns through consistent observation. So instead of just looking for those hidden underlying issues in the protective parent right away, learning theory really puts the focus on the rejection behavior itself.
So let's get concrete here. What exactly are we talking about when we say suspicious behavior? What kind of things should people be watching for?
Right, great question. When we're talking about suspicious behavior in this context, what Dr. DeBray highlights for us is that it's those instances of really forceful, almost aggressive rejection from the child. And these rejections, well, they don't just happen once in a blue moon. They're pretty consistent. They tend to occur in most, if not all, interactions with that protective parent.
So it's not just a bad day here or there, it's a recurring pattern.
Yeah. But here's where it gets even more interesting and what really should raise a red flag for you. That suspicion gets even stronger when there's no clear reason, no observable reason for this rejection. It's not like the protective parent has a documented history of threats or violence. There's no evidence of them intimidating the child. In fact, that's one of the key things that makes this so puzzling, right? That lack of any obvious cause.
So for you at home, imagine this. You're in a situation where a child is vehemently rejecting a parent, but you look at the protected parent's past, and there's just nothing there. No reports of abuse, no witnesses, no history of that kind of behavior. That's what really starts to make you think, okay, something else might be going on here.
Exactly. And that's where we see a really big difference between learning theory and the traditional clinical way of looking at these things.
Right, because clinically, you might immediately start digging into the dynamics of the parent-child relationship, maybe focusing on the internal state of the parent or looking for some sort of hidden trauma. But you're saying with learning theory, it's different.
Right. It's a different approach. Learning theory says, hold on, let's start with the observable. Let's look at what's actually happening, especially when there's no justification for that behavior coming from the protective parent. It's not that we're saying the child's feelings aren't valid. It's more about asking, are those feelings rooted in actual past experiences with this specific parent? Or could there be something else at play?
And this is where the idea of a baseline of prior behavior becomes so crucial, right?
Absolutely. It's a fundamental concept for you. So what do we mean by baseline? Well, you're not just looking at what's happening right now in the present. You're taking that current rejection behavior and comparing it to the child's confirmed behavioral history with the protective parent. You're asking, how did the child act towards this parent before these intense rejections started? And that's where things can get really revealing.
Okay, so for everyone listening, think about it this way. If we're trying to understand why a child is suddenly terrified of dogs, we'd want to know, were they always afraid of dogs? Or did something happen recently to trigger that fear? It's about looking for those changes, those shifts in behavior. And what you're saying is that in these cases, when we look back at the child's prior history with the protective parent, and we find zero evidence of abuse, no records, no observations, no reports of any kind, well, that changes the whole picture, doesn't it?
It really does. And this is where we have to bring in a core concept from learning theory, the experience field. Think of this as the whole environment where learning takes place. It's not just a physical space, like the child's bedroom. It's also about the social interactions, the people they're constantly around, the routines, even the things they own and use every day. It's this whole dynamic system of influence where those learned behaviors get shaped and reinforced.
So it's like the stage where all this learning is happening with all these different actors and props.
Yeah, that's a good analogy. And
Sure.
the key thing for you to understand is that everything in this field, every interaction, whether it's with a person or even just an object, it becomes familiar. And that familiarity creates associations. It creates connections in the child's mind. And these associations, over time, they shape, they strengthen, and they maintain certain learned behaviors. Think about it like this. If you spend a lot of time in a certain environment, let's say a library, you naturally start to adjust your behavior, right? You lower your voice, you move more carefully, you become more aware of the quiet atmosphere. It's the same principle here.
So the more time spent in a specific experience field, the more predictable those behaviors will become within that context.
Exactly. And our source material outlines three main ways this learning happens in these experience fields. The first one, and it's the most straightforward, is instruction. This is where you have, let's say, a parent who directly tells the child how they should behave towards the other parent. You know, they might say things like, don't talk to your dad, or if you're nice to your mom, then you won't get this special treat. There's this very clear cause and effect link. If you do this, then this will happen.
Right, very direct, almost like a command.
Exactly. The second way, though, and this one's crucial for you to recognize, is through modeling or imitation. This is where the child is learning by just observing the behavior of the allied parent. They see the way that parent talks about the other parent. They see how they act, and they start to mimic those behaviors. Think about how young children learn language. They don't start by reading grammar books, right? They learn by listening and imitating the people around them. And that's powerful because sometimes it's not even what's being said directly. It's the tone of voice, the facial expressions, the overall attitude. Children are incredibly perceptive and they pick up on all those subtle cues.
It's like they're absorbing the entire emotional atmosphere. Okay, so we've got direct instruction and we've got modeling or imitation. What's the third way this learning takes place within the experience field?
The third one is guided participation with physical enhancements. Now, this might sound a little complicated, but it basically means that the allied parent is actively involved in helping the child display those desired behaviors. They might physically prompt the child to do something, or they might arrange situations where the child is almost guaranteed to behave in a certain way.
So it's almost like setting the stage for a specific outcome.
Exactly. And what's important for you to see here is that all three of these methods, they all create a kind of cause and effect learning situation within that experience field. It's either if you do this, then you'll get something good. That's the reward. Or it's if you don't do this, then something bad will happen. That's the threat or punishment.
And this brings us back to those situations where we see this really strong, consistent rejection behavior aimed at the protective parent. And remember, there's nothing in the child's past with that parent to explain it. So you're saying that in these cases, learning theory suggests that we need to shift our focus. We need to look at where that learning is most likely happening, and that's in the other parent's experience field.
You got it. And that's where that dog and hat analogy comes in. Do you want to remind everyone about that?
Yeah, let's go through that one again because I think it's really helpful.
So for you at home, picture this. You put your favorite brand new hat in a room with your dog. You lock the door so nothing else can get in. You come back a little while later and your hat is completely shredded. There's no one else in there. It had to have been the dog. Now, you didn't actually see the dog eat the hat, did you? But the evidence, the torn up hat, tells you exactly what happened.
So the room itself and everything inside it, that's the dog's experience field, right? Yep.
Right. It's the environment where that behavior, the hat eating took place. Now, how does this relate to what we're talking about? Well, the child's behavior towards each parent is like that hat. And each parent's home environment, the way they interact with the child, the things they say and do, all of that becomes a different room or different experience feel.
I see it. So the child might act one way in mom's house and a completely different way in dad's house.
Exactly. And it's not necessarily because one parent is inherently better than the other. It's because the child has learned different behaviors and associations within each of those experience fields. They might have learned that with one parent, showing affection is safe and rewarding. But in the other parent's environment, they've learned that showing affection towards the protective parent leads to negative consequences. Maybe they get ignored or yelled at or punished in some way. So over time, they start to shut down those feelings, those behaviors when they're with that parent.
So even if there were some overlapping elements, like both parents have the same rules about bedtime or screen time, these specific patterns of behavior that are triggered in the experience field with the allied parent are going to be different. And those patterns, unfortunately, can include those rejection behaviors we've been talking about.
Exactly. And here's another key principle from learning theory for you to keep in mind. Behavior change only happens through learning. You can't just will it away or expect it to change overnight without addressing the underlying learning mechanisms.
So it's not just about telling the child, hey, you need to be nicer to your mom. It's about understanding that those behaviors are a product of a specific learning environment. And to change those behaviors, we need to change that environment.
Exactly. You know, sometimes we don't need to have a video recording of the allied parent actively indoctrinating the child. Sometimes we can reach a pretty clear understanding just by looking at those patterns of behavior. It's like that dog and hat analogy, remember? We don't need to see the dog eating the hat to know that it probably happened.
So it's about looking at the evidence, the observable behaviors, and then comparing those behaviors across the different experience fields. And if we see those really strong rejection behaviors consistently directed towards the protective parent, and we know there's no reason for it in their past, well, then we have to consider that those behaviors were learned somewhere else.
You got it. And it's really, really important to consider this perspective. Our source material really emphasizes this. It says that ignoring this learning theory framework can lead to some seriously harmful decisions.
Like what? What are some of the risks of not seeing this?
Well, imagine this. You have a situation where a child is rejecting a parent, and everyone's focused on the protective parent, trying to figure out what they're doing wrong, trying to find some flaw in their personality or their parenting style that could be causing this. But what if those flaws don't exist? What if the rejection isn't about the protective parent at all, but about what the child is learning and experiencing in the other parent's environment?
You're saying we might be looking in the wrong place entirely?
Exactly. And if we're not careful, we can waste a lot of time and energy and resources trying to fix a problem that doesn't actually exist within the protective parent. And that delay, well, it can have devastating consequences for both the child and the protective parent. It allows that harmful conditioning, that negative learning to continue, which can damage the child's attachment to the protective parent even further.
And that can lead to other problems down the road, right?
Absolutely. It can lead to things like emotional dysregulation, difficulty forming healthy relationships, even the development of some really troubling personality traits, things that start to resemble what we see in, more severe personality disorders. So from a learning theory perspective, it's critical to act quickly.
And that brings us to the issue of removing the child from the abusive experience field. Our source material is really strong on this point, saying that removing the child is often absolutely crucial. But I know this can be a really controversial topic, and people might immediately think, wait, isn't that punishing the child?
Yeah, I understand that reaction. But it's important for you to understand that in this framework, removing the child isn't seen as a punishment. It's seen as an intervention. It's about stopping the ongoing abuse, both of the child and of the protective parent. See, when a child is constantly exposed to that abusive experience field, that harmful learning is just going to continue. And the longer that goes on, the deeper those negative patterns become ingrained. So removing the child is really about disrupting that cycle, about giving them a chance to learn new, healthier ways of behaving and relating to others.
So you're saying that keeping the child in that harmful environment is actually illogical and unreasonable from this perspective?
That's how it's seen, yes,
Yeah.
because you're essentially allowing the abuse to continue.
So the goal is to stop that harmful learning and create an opportunity for healing and for new positive learning to take place.
Exactly. And that's usually going to involve a lot of different things: therapy, support groups, creating a safe and stable environment for the child. But that initial step of removing them from the abusive experience field, that's often considered to be the most crucial for you to consider.
So let's sum up what we've learned in this deep dive, because it's been, well, a lot to take in. We've been talking about those really tough situations where a child seems to inexplicably reject a parent who has no history of abuse. And we've been exploring this through the lens of learning theory, using Dr. William Dubri's work as our guide.
Right. And the big takeaway for you is that learning theory offers a very different way to understand these situations. It shifts the focus away from looking for problems within the rejected parent. Instead, it says, let's look at the child's behavior. Let's look at their past history with that parent. And let's look at the environment, the experience field where those rejection behaviors are happening.
And when we do that, we start to see things in a whole new light. We might find that those rejection behaviors, they're not some deep-seated psychological issue.
Yeah.
They might be learned responses shaped and reinforced within a specific environment. And as we've discussed, once you see that, the way you approach these situations changes completely.
It really does. And it's so important for you to remember this, especially when those traditional explanations just aren't cutting it. When you're in that situation where, as our source so aptly put it, your lawyer cannot explain what's going on.
Because sometimes the answers aren't in the legal system or in those deep psychological theories. Sometimes the answers are right there in front of us, in the child's behavior, in their history, and in the environments where they're learning how to be in the world. So we're going to leave you with something to think about. We've been talking about how these experience fields shape the way children behave, but think about this. How are those same principles playing out in your own life? How are the environments you're in, the people you surround yourself with, the things you see and hear every day? How are they shaping your own thoughts, feelings, and behaviors? It's a fascinating question, and one that deserves a whole deep dive of its own, so maybe we'll explore that another time. But for now, thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.
Have you been victimized by family court? Are you suffering parental alienation? It's child abuse and it's domestic violence by proxy. Are you stuck drowning in legal and mental health bills? Get off the treadmill, escape the trap. With over 10 years of research, thousands of parent interviews and case studies worldwide, we have developed a system that works to help you get your kids back. Join the movement now. HopeInDarkness.info, StopTheAbuse.info, AlienationAcademy.com, and TheFlyingMonkeyPodcast.com. It's time for change, and it's time to stop the abuse. Go to tinyurl.com/stop-parental-alienation.
Thanks for watching the Flying Monkey Podcast. Like, follow, and subscribe to our social media sites on Facebook, X, YouTube, Rumble, TikTok, and Truth Social. You can also go straight to our webpage at www.flyingmonkeypodcast.com.